tier, please visit LibriVox.org. Dormant by E. Nesbit. Chapter 1. Malacca Wharf. Malacca Wharf lies on a little creek of the great muddy river, a creek into which the ooze has silted, till it is at low water merely a stretch of smooth glistening mud. And even when the tide is high, the water that looks so profound has not the depth that shall float an unladen barge. The wharf has dropped out of its place in the great come and go, the round game of trade with the round world where fate and tide and the winds deal the cards, and sooner or later, every player loses. It had been worth no one's while to spend a fortune on clearing the creek, so the wharf and its warehouses stood deserted, decaying. At night lit by the dipping lanterns on the ships at anchor in the stream, and by the gas lamp in the rough road outside the great shut gates, the place was still imposing enough. Seen thus, it might have been a wharf where ships bound for the Fortunate Islands took on their lovely varied freights, where scented cargoes from tropic lands were unloaded from strange ships of unfamiliar rig, manned by outland men with musical speech and daggers in their boots. The dark buildings might have held bloomy tea, rich silk from the flowery land, carpets from Persian looms, broideries worked in Purda by hidden Indian beauties, and sent out across 2 continents to lie among strange wonders in that tall house of treasure from overseas. But dawn tore down the kind shadows, and the mystery of the darkness turned in the daylight to ancient disorder, and a decay almost complete enough to be called ruin. Grass grew between the cobblestones of the yard. The timbers at the water's edge were rotting apart. On the heap of old barrows, cracked and distorted, black moss grew. The warehouses and sheds showed grey light through many chinks and rifts, and in their roofs were squares of grey light, the places whence slates had slipped in old storms. In the dulled windows, cobwebs replaced the shattered panes. All the wooden buildings were broken, crooked, settling into dissolution. Only the large, brick-built warehouse and the little house by the yard gate were still whole, and whether their windows were broken or not, they kept their secrets behind close-nailed boards and heavy shutters. On the other side of a desolate, sordid waste space, where weeds and sickly grass strove with old tins and broken crockery, lay the mean nearest street. The more adventurous of the children, whose home this street was, had been used to leave the waste space their playground, to seek the keener joys of play in the deserted wharf. The smaller sheds could be explored. A loose plank or a hole in the masonry let in the little curious prying human animals. But the big warehouse and the little square house resisted firmly. It was fun to creep through the little door in the great gate. There was a hole that you could put your hand through and so draw the bolts, and to hide when you heard the faraway, unmistakable boots of the rare policeman. To the unwashed, ill-smelling, ragged, bright-eyed boys, the old wharf was the greatest wonder of their world, a quiet, secret place where you could do what you liked, and nobody scolded or swore at you, except your friends and equals, on whom you could joyously and confidently retaliate. Malacca Wharf had always been there. It always would be there. There was a board up that said, "To let," but no one ever answered what it said. And year after year, the woodwork and the stonework and the bricks and the slates and the tiles, under sun and frost, moved a little. A very little, nearer the time when they should all be dust together, and the boys played there. It was with a shock of surprise that they found one day the big gates closed, and when the daring leader climbed to the top of the wall and looked down, he almost fell from that eminence, and the word "Jiminy" sprang unbidden to his lips. "What's up, Elf?" asked his followers from below. "It's a chap, in an apron, putting in the windows." "They've got them fool to take it," suggested a businesslike child with a straight nose and beautiful dark eyes. "Won't he be gay when he finds out about the shallow water?" "There's another chap with a paint pot," said the leader in low, awe-struck tones. "Green paint. He's doing the doorposts." "Let's have a squint," said the businesslike child, pulling at the leg of the leader who fell off the wall. And before he had picked himself out of the mud, the dark-eyed one was in his place, the only place where the broken bottles were broken enough to be disregarded. "Let's come when these chaps is gone and bust all the winders," suggested an undistinguished boy. "No profit in that," said he on the wall. "Some of us might get took on here before they knows about the water. Wouldn't last, but there would be something sticking to it. I say, mister," he added over the wall, addressing the chap in an apron. Want anyone to lend a hand? The glazier, used to the boys of the neighborhood, answered by a brief description of the inquirer's character, delivered without malice, and the business child retorted, also without malice, but with a superior vocabulary. The glazier replied, the boy rejoined, while the deposed leader and the others listened admiringly. The glazier was the first to weary of the complimentary exchange. Here, you run along home, you young unmentionable, he said amiably. Telleth who took the old pig thigh, said the boy persuasively. If I tell you, will you cut along and not come back? Not today, anyhow. If you telleth me enough, I will, said the child, pleased with any bargain which he might gain more than he gave. Well then, no one's took it. That ain't enough, not for me to cut along on. Well then, the owner's coming to live here. That's a lie, said half a dozen voices from beyond the wall. It's gospel truth, said the glazier. Now, hook it. With much talk, and very slowly, they did hook it, and the glazier went on with his work. The painter went on with his too, and so did the plasterer and the bricklayer, and when the boys came next day, firm set cement and a chevaux de frise of bottles said no, very sharply to their curiosity. Also the loose bricks had been replaced in the wall and there was no foothold. And after a day or two, it did not seem to be worthwhile to take half an hour out of your free time just to cut across to Malacca and shout abuse outside a very high brick wall. And inside the wall, the workmen went on working, and late one night, when there were no boys about, a little van load of furniture came along the old broken road that skirted the desolate waste space, and the owner set up housekeeping in the little house by the gate, and there were muslin curtains and window boxes, and a wire netting over the windows that did not look on the yard, so that it was no use to throw stones. Carter Patterson was always leaving boxes and things there, but no one could say what trade the owner proposed to ply. The boys watched in vain for the first barge to come failing up the creek, for no barge came, and then they watched for the owner, and weeks went on, and presently it was no secret that the owner was a woman, and lived there alone. This news decided the gang. The very next Sunday they repaired to the wharf to enjoy themselves. They had not quite decided what form the enjoyment should take. Vaguely it was phrased as letting her have it. To this end they collected a good many stones, and one of the boys, whose father was often out at night and exercised a profession involving unusual implements, brought a cold chisel to knock out the newly inserted bricks. Another brought a piece of old carpet for the negotiating of the bottles on the top of the wall. The campaign was opened by yells, a few snatches of unsavory comic songs, and a shower of stones at the great gates. Then Benny, the businesslike child, began to use the chisel, and the rest collected more stones. They had just collected a nice heap, and a brick was getting quite loose, when there was a sound from within. Bolts were being withdrawn. The besieging army drew back, a little uncertain. One or two of the more stalwart stooped for stones. One stone was thrown. It was a very fair shot. It hit the little door in the big gate just under the keyhole, and the marksman stooped for another stone. But before he could grasp it, the little door was opened, and a young woman in a blue dress stood there looking at them. They looked at her, doubtful, astonished, grave, hostile. She smiled brilliantly at them. It is a very difficult thing to smile in the face of serious hostility, but she did it. She did more. She threw back the door and said amazingly, "Won't you come in?" No one moved. "Do come in," she said. "Come and look at my funny garden. It's so pretty. I've been wanting to show it to someone. You'll come, won't you?" She turned the appeal of voice and eye and smiled directly on the beautiful Benjamin, standing, chisel in hand. "I don't mind," he said. "So long as it's understand you asked us. It ain't trespass, you know, miss. Though if you've got the coppers up your sleeve, we ain't done nothing, see?" "Of course you haven't done anything," she said. "But there's something I wish you would do. I want to move one of my trees, and it's too heavy for me. Would you mind helping me?" "What do you give us?" asked the child. "I was asking you as a friend," she said reproachfully. And for a moment it was touch and go. A rowdy guffaw answered her. A snigger answered the guffaw, and a voice cried, "Huh, yes, let's be friend, lady." And a voice uplifted in song urged, "Let us be true, me and you, ever the best of friends." But her fearless eyes conquered. After all, they were only a lot of children. "Come on," she said. "Don't let's waste time in talking. You come in," she said to Benny, "and I'll leave the door open, and the rest of you can come in just when you like. See?" She held out her hand to the businesslike child, and he took it and stepped across the wooden threshold. "This is the tree," she said, putting her hand on the smooth stem of a little bay tree in a green tub, "and I want to move it as far as this." She indicated the spot with the tip of a real Sunday shoe. "Lend me a hand, won't you?" Benny, with a vision of red and blue and yellow and great cleanness dazzling his dark eyes, lent a hand. When the tub had been moved, the lady looked round and the little yard was dark with crowding boys. "Are we all in?" she asked, and 6 voices answered, "Yes, lady." 6 others answered, "Yes, teacher." "Good," she said. "Then shut the door, one of you." The door was shut, and the lady of the Malacca turned to her guests. "Now," she said, "isn't it pretty?" It was. On the flagged pavement of her little yard stood 4 bay trees in tubs. All round was a narrow border of black mold, trimmed with red and white geraniums and lobelias and calceolarias. The windows of the house had white curtains, and each window had its window box, ardent with primary colors. A wall with a door in it divided the little sunny yard from the big cobbled yard of the wharf. It, with all of the woodwork in sight, was painted a soft, bright, pleasant green. And in the middle stood the lady in blue, smiling. "I can't ask you all to tea," she said, "because I haven't enough milk." Somebody said, "Never mind about milk, or enough tea, or sugar, or teacups or anything, but there's one thing I have got enough of. That's biscuits. Hands up for biscuits." Hands were up. "Then I'll go and get them." She went into her house, leaving them awestruck. When she came back, a scuffle was just reaching its climax in the banging and locking of the little door. "All right, lady," several breathless voices assured her. "He pinched one of your flowers and we chucked him out." "Thank you," she said. "It's kind of you to take care of my garden. But shall we let him come back? I don't think he'll pick any more." Reluctantly, they opened the gate. "She says you can come in again if you'll keep your hands to yourself." "I don't want to come in," he said. "Silly Billy," he added bitterly, and trailed away across the waste. But he came again the next Sunday when the rest of the boys, by special invitation, went to Malacca Wharf for what the lady called another biscuit party. Thus did the lady, partly by luck, and partly by that incalculable thing we call personality, defend herself against the child hooligans of the waste. It was after the second party that she told the tale to a friend of hers. "I really was rather frightened," she said, "but I took the bull in both hands and tried loving my enemies. Or, at any rate, acting as if I loved them. Then, afterwards, I found I really did. And they're quite dears, some of them, and I'm going to have biscuit parties once a week. I can't afford real tea parties, and you and some of the others might come down sometimes and help me play with them." "Why have I gone to live there? I thought you knew." "Oh, I forgot. You've been in Cornwall all the while, haven't you?" "Well, I've been coming of age, and then they told me what my little bit of money comes from. It's rents in the East End. And Malacca is part of my property, only it won't let. So I thought I'd live there and save rent. I've been waiting for you to come back to have my housewarming." "It isn't safe," said the friend, crumbling his bread. They were dining at a little restaurant in Soho. "You oughtn't to live there alone." "I'm not alone," she said. "I've got a lovely char hag. She has the loveliest voice. She used to sing in the streets. She happened to be out that day, but she's a tower of strength, really. She can't defend you from big hooligans," he said. "You don't know what those East End roughs are." "Well, never mind," she said comfortably. "Come to my housewarming and see my little hooligans." "Thank you, Alphonse. 1 millefeuille and 1 petit suisse." She smiled on the waiter, as she'd smiled on the boys. "Everyone's moving," said her friend. "Sullivan's going to America, and Anthony's got the kick out from his place. Can't stand the smells. I warned him they wouldn't. Why do chemists always insist on using the drugs that are stenches? They must know before they begin what the things in the bottles smell like." "Where's he going?" she asked, ignoring the more abstruse question. "I don't know. Can't find anyone who'll have him. His candid nature compels him. He can't exaggerate the smells, but I believe he would if he could, in the service of truth." "Will he ever find out anything?" she asked. "Yes, lots of things. Whether they'll be what he wants." "What sort of place does he want?" "Oh, big, and no questions asked, and cheap. That sort of place doesn't go begging. Have some coffee?" "Please, white coffee." "No, that sort of place doesn't," she said thoughtfully. "If you're going straight home," he said after the coffee, "I'll see you there. May I? And walk back. I want to walk." When coffee was over, he paid his reckoning, she hers. For this was not an assignation dinner, but a mere chance rencounter at a little French eating house, where that night no other of the friends of either happened to be. The reckoning paid, he saw her home, to the house on the creek in the far east, by the ugliest of the many lines that worm their dirty way out of London. Both were thoughtful. He walked home. On the next Sunday, the little hooligans were dazzled by 2 more ladies and 4 gents, who taught them new and wonderful games and played with them. When the party had culminated in biscuits and the ragged guests gone, the lady in blue took her friends to see her little house and her big studio, the top floor of the warehouse on the far side of the inner court. It was reached by an outside stairway of stone that ran up the side of the building. And all her friends admired everything very much, especially Anthony Drelincourt. "I wish I could find a place like this," he told her, as he and she came down the stairs after the others. "There are 2 floors below and a basement," she said. "You could have either or both or all 3. "Do you mean it?" he said eagerly. "It's the ideal place, but I should be in your way. And the rent. Couldn't afford it. If I don't let it to a friend, I shan't let it to anyone," she said shortly. "And you wouldn't be in my way. There's an inner staircase to the 2 other floors. We needn't see each other even if we don't want to." "Are you sure?" he asked. And she laughed. "Of course I'm sure," she said. "What's the rent?" he asked. £15 a year, she said, since that was what he paid for the attic he was leaving. £15 and nothing found. "I could get the gas laid on?" "Of course." "There is water laid on." "I will then." "It's jolly decent of you, Rose. Sure I won't be a nuisance. When you've set the Thames on fire with your great discovery, and they are all writing your biography, they'll say, 'His landlady was called Rose Royal.' And when you've set the Thames on fire with your pictures, they'll write, 'She had a tenant called Anthony Drelincourt.'" When Rose announced the tenancy to William Batts, he said, "Oh," and then, after a quite perceptible pause, "So now you'll have someone to see you home occasionally. That's all right. And a man within call. Get him to fix a telephone between your place and his." "Nonsense," said Rose. But before he'd been in the place a week, the telephone was fixed. And now that was all nearly a year ago. For a year, these 2 earnestly unconventional young people had been neighbors in that far eastern country. He had not been in her way, but she had found it necessary to exert her will to keep out of his. She bought an old round-nosed punt for 35 shillings because she knew it would amuse him to paddle about in it, and tried not to be in sight whenever he stooped to loosen it from its moorings. She lent him her charwoman, and would have lent or given him almost anything else, but he never asked for anything else. And now the cold, yellow, foggy light of a March dawn shines upon Miss Royal, going across the large courtyard with something in each hand, something which she carries carefully. She sets the things down at the door of the warehouse, takes out a little key and opens the door, and goes in and shuts it. A few minutes later she comes out, and goes quietly and quickly back to her little square house with the muslin and geranium windows. Anthony Drelincourt had made himself a nest of such materials as his kind uses for nest building. The ground floor he kept locked always. No one but himself ever went in, and no one knew for certain what he did there. Most of the big first floor of the warehouse, with its row of gray, uncurtained, unshuttered windows, was sheer laboratory, with the usual medley of bright porcelain and glass. 2 large distilling flasks holding bright-colored liquids formed with their condensers and receiving flasks, an imposing group, and together with a large filter full of dubious-looking mess, plainly said, "Organic chemist," to any well-informed observer. To Rose, they simply said, "Anthony as usual." A small, dirty copper oven stood as a sort of connecting link to the oddly domestic-looking saucepans and cake tins which make such good water baths. Shelves of labeled bottles, clean test tubes and dirty test tubes, a few stray dry cells and accumulators, a few odd tools scattered about, bits of insulated wire, cork borers and corks made a harmonious background. A large square table covered with papers was under one window. Under another, the microscope had a little table to its brassy self. On a third, a bright balance glittered attractively. In one corner, a little room stood out. It had been a counting house in the days when Malacca Wharf was a wharf, not a derelict. This room, with the space near it, surrounding the fireplace and in but not of the laboratory proper, was a sort of shabby oasis furnished with odd jetsam from the domestic life of an age not his. A lady's silk-welled work table, A prie-dieu chair with lilies worked on it in beads, a tall crimson banner screen, 2 gilded empire chairs, a round table of papier-mâché lacquered with golden birds that stood upright like a great black and yellow sunflower, a shelf of crockery, another of pots and pans, a worn Aubusson carpet once of delicate beauty, and against the wall shelves and shelves of books. The light grew, but it was still twilight in the quiet laboratory when Anthony came in from his bedroom in his dressing gown to light the fire, so that the kettle should be boiling by the time he had dressed and shaved. He reached for the matches which should have been on the little work table. He did not find them. Instead, his hand struck against something cold and unfamiliar which fell over with a crash, and something cold and wet flooded his hand and the table. He said something, and fetched the matches from his bedroom. His lamp, lighted quickly, showed him that he had upset a tall, straight green vase in which 2 red roses had been standing. They lay on the floor now among a shining shatter of glass, and table and carpet were drenched with the water from the vase. A squat pot full of violets had escaped, and stood solidly. A drowned white thing caught his eye. It was a paper on which he read the words, "Happy Birthday, R.R." "Oh, bother the girl," said Anthony as he mopped up the water. It was not until after breakfast that he began to feel how kind it was of her. He wrote a little note. "1,000 thanks. How do you manage always to think of such pretty things and such pretty ways of doing them? I thought the fairies had been here, but it was only you." Fortunately, he read this over and changed the ending to, "I thought a good fairy had been here, and I was right," which was much better. You do not know what any of these people looked like. You shall quite soon now. Myself, I never want to know what people look like until I know where they live, and what they do and say and think, and whether they are rich or poor. Nobody has done or said or thought much so far. But at any rate, we know where Rose Royal lives, and that she has a wharf and an income, and we know where Anthony Drelincourt lives, but even he himself could never estimate his income, which, with his expenditure, varied too much to be estimable. Anyhow, he was very poor. And Rose Royal was much too poor to be buying red roses at $1 apiece and round-nosed punts at 35 shillings. She had not, however, spent the last of her month's money on the violets and the red roses. She proposed to spend some of the rest on things to eat for a party she was going to that night, and some she meant to spend on a real birthday present for her tenant. The roses and violets, in her opinion, were not real presents. "I wish," she said, throwing down her palette after a hopeless morning, "that I had £1,000. Then I could buy something worth giving to a person. Roses and rubbish. It's hateful to be poor. When I give a present, I should like it to be a present that there isn't another of in the world. And there are thousands and millions of any of the sort of things that I can afford to buy for anyone.